Okay, so the question is doubt a sin? And the person says they were raised Catholic and that they learned that doubt was a sin. So first of all, let me address the quick answer from our tradition, that it would just be the opposite. You really can't grow spiritually if you don't doubt. So doubt is a critical aspect of spiritual growth. It's the only way. So one of the things you might think about is you cannot inherit your faith from your parents. It's great. One of the best gifts that parents can give kids is some sort of spiritual life or spiritual knowledge, but it cannot be inherited. Even that has to be at some point looked at, taken out, questioned, thought about, and become your own. So not only is doubt not a sin, questioning your faith is critical for spiritual growth. That would be the short answer. As far as the mentioning that you're Catholic, I would just say that the Catholic tradition, if you were going to approach your Catholic tradition, there's actually the great mystics in Catholicism. Saint Teresa of Avila, she actually, and John of the Cross, they came up with concepts like the long, dark night of the soul. Have you ever heard that phrase? That's from that mystical Catholic tradition. And it's a beautiful description that we're all going to go through periods where we just have lots of doubts and we might feel like we've lost our faith completely. Again, on the Catholic part of it, Mother Teresa, who's maybe one of the most famous Catholic teachers that we can think of in modern times, wrote in her autobiography that there were times that she absolutely had no faith. She questioned her faith completely. So it is definitely, so when someone says that, because that was in my church, usually what happens in certain churches is that very possibly the leadership of the church, whoever's running it, is trying to control everybody and keep them on the same team. And they fear that if you start questioning, you'll leave. And so it actually represents the insecurity usually of church leaders when they're saying that they're trying to control people into it. So doubting is very good, and questioning is very good. Can you get stuck with it? Yes. I mean, you could get to a point where you could just kind of cross your arms and be very cynical and say, oh, this is all a bunch of crap and I'm not going to believe any of this. You could get stuck in that. That's not really doubt. That's sort of checking out completely. But for the most part, when this person says that they're climbing a hill and they're falling down, that is a pretty universal experience for anybody on a faith path, and that our whole life here is made up of those struggles. That's why we're here, and we keep growing. So doubt is definitely not a sin. And then, let's see, the text that we use today, just very quickly, the Bible would reinforce that. So in the one text that we used, we have the story of doubting Thomas, and Thomas doesn't believe at first, and Jesus does not insult or criticize. He says, I welcome you to touch. In other words, your doubt is well-founded. Go ahead, let's go with it. So that would be an example of God's teaching about it. The story where there's a quote, and it's a very famous biblical quote, where a father says to Jesus, here's my belief, help me in my unbelief. That's actually a wonderful prayer. You could just say at times when you have real serious doubts, God, just help me in my unbelief right now. And that was a story of a father who had either a possessed or epileptic child, and he was asking Jesus to heal, and Jesus said, if you believe, the child can be healed. And Jesus basically said, and the guy is worried, the father's worried, I have a lack of belief, help me with it. So that's all of our prayer. So all of us can, when we feel those doubts, we could respond with, gosh, I lack belief right now, but help me in my unbelief. So we could also do that. The third story that we had in the scripture readings today was the story of the wrestling of Jacob with an angel. And it's a symbolic story. And in the story of Jacob, won't go into the whole story, but he's about to face his brother who he has betrayed. He's very nervous. He wrestles with an angel, and that wrestling, he says, I won't stop wrestling until I get a blessing. That story symbolizes the spiritual struggle for all of us. that we're all supposed to wrestle with our doubts. And that's what the angel represents. And that at the end of that story, he gets a new name. He goes from Jacob to Israel, and that's where the name Israel comes from. And so the point of that story is that when we go through that wrestling match, we get a blessing after that period of doubt, and we move to a higher spiritual level, and we're actually a different person. So again, all those would reinforce it. If you're still not convinced, look at the life of Jesus and remember the Easter sermon. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, if you could take this away from me, it would be great, Father, That's doubt. Not sure how this is playing out. Jesus on the cross, why have you forsaken me? That's doubt. So even in Jesus, humanity and God in one person is teaching us that there will be times when we will have doubts. That's good. Finally, the part of the question was about, sometimes I believe Jesus is a great teacher, and the more I learn about the Bible, the less it makes any sense. As far as Jesus being a great teacher, one, I would say that your faith experience cannot just be an intellectual one. It's not like you're going to study this and you're going to get this all in your head. It's going to be an experience in your heart. So whatever Jesus is going to be for you is going to be a matter of a spiritual experience. But if you're really stuck, people have been very stuck on who Jesus is through the years who have asked me that question. And I always say, how would your life be different if Jesus was or wasn't God? It doesn't really matter. And I would just say, live your life. If it doesn't change your life, what does it matter? It doesn't really matter. So I wouldn't get hung up on the theology. I would just continue with the struggle and the questions, but the questions are good, and that's a good question. And finally, there was a statement about the Bible. The more I study it, the more I have questions about it. People have been studying the Bible for centuries. Scholars have been studying the Bible for centuries. Ministers. When we come to Church of the Holy City, if you look at all of our sermons, we're tearing it apart. We're studying it. What's going on here? What's really the story here? So have at it. Have at it. The Bible is written in different ways. What I love about our tradition is that we don't take the Bible literally at certain parts. The story of Jacob and the angel is much more important as a spiritual psychology story for us than it is whether there was a being who appeared as an angel and there was a Jacob and there was a wrestling match. That's much less important. What's more important is that we are being taught that we can wrestle with God and that we can get a blessing. So I wouldn't get into the literal interpretations and get stuck in inerrancy and all that stuff. We don't hold to that. Look for the spiritual meaning. And again, you can't do it all in your head. And this is sometimes a problem for Swedenborgians. It has to be in your heart. You have to have I use the phrase revolution of the heart. You have to have a change of your heart, that you're open to these things and that you can pray for that. I would say personally, I don't believe, my faith is not built on what I intellectually understand, even though I've studied a lot of this. I believe because I've had many experiences. In fact, I've had so many spiritual experiences in my life that I think it's been a huge gift because I don't question as much because it's as real to me as anything that I experience in my physical life. So I think really what we want to do is develop our spiritual experience and our spiritual engagement and not just make it an intellectual. It's great to question, it's great to have the intellect, but look for those miracles, epiphanies, things that will light up your belief and make it clear. And that's been very helpful for me. One of the helpful things about this tradition for me, Swedenborgianism, is the view of life after death being so clear. I've kind of experienced bits of it and I've studied it, but it actually I find very helpful for belief as well. It gives me a way of looking. I'll conclude by saying that when I transfer into the next life, with all of my great knowledge that I've studied here and I've preached about, I am sure they're going to say, boy, you got so much wrong. That you operated with that, you saw only a little piece of it. You saw just a little fragment. Yeah, your intentions were good, but you're going to be open to much more teachings. So I say that just to be humble, that we're trying to all just figure this out. I sometimes speak when I'm answering questions on Sunday as though this is absolutely crystal clear and this is the truth, but I approach it all with great humility and know that we're just getting a little glimmer and trying to make sense of this life as best we can. And that's what I'm trying to do on Sundays. But at the same time, we have to have humility to say we're just getting a little piece of it. So that would be my response to doubt. I actually will say that when you're doubting, you're actually showing respect of God. You're not sinning. You're actually showing you care. The worst you could be is apathetic and not be engaged at all. And that's how much the world is. So keep doubting. And that is, now what I want to do is, if anybody has a question about what I said, that's fine. If you have a suggestion for the person who asks the question about doubt, if you have a strategy or a personal way you deal with doubt, that would be most helpful too. So it could either be you have a solution that you'd like to share, here's how I deal with doubt, or you could say, it could be, Rich, I doubt what you said, so I have a question. Anybody like to jump in on this? Katie.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say I really appreciated this question and the person who was brave to volunteer to do this first. I wanted to share a little bit about my personal doubt and then some strategies that I've found helpful too. So I'll spare everyone the details, but recently I started a Christian student group at my school, which has been really fun. I was expecting maybe 5 kids, and about 30 kids have shown up, so it's been very well populated, and we do a lot of like Bible games and things like that. Um, for like one thing that came up in our group was we were playing like Bible Would You Rather, and the question was, would you rather like sit in silence with Jesus, or would you rather listen to Jesus preach, or something like that? Like they're very generic questions for kids. And one of the kids said that he would rather listen to Jesus because that would be like hearing the greatest musician of all time play a concert. So I promise that I'm getting to my point, but it just, this group of kids just has such great like amazement and wonder when it comes to God. And you would think that that would make me feel closer to God, but it almost makes me feel more guilty about the doubts that I've had. Because it's just come up like when I was a kid, I never had this like childlike sense of wonder when it came to Christianity or God. I was actually really like it was really fear-based for me. So working with this group of kids, it's been really amazing, but it's also made me like question my own Christianity too. And whenever I have doubts like that, I just wanted to say for this person that they're not alone. And for me, strategies that have helped is just like looking for the details of things around me, like looking at the freckles in your eyes, or if you look really closely at like just anything around you, it just makes me think of like the beauty of creation. And there has to be like some kind of great architect that designed it all. So I think for me, that's just my strategy is just looking for the details around me.
Great strategy, great story. And Katie, as you were talking, it just reminded me when the children tried to get to Jesus and the disciples said, this is the great teacher, get away. And he said, let the children come unto me because this is the kingdom of heaven. You will learn from children. They understand it better. And it's interesting how we kind of get that worked out of us as adults, and we get to be so knowledgeable. So thank you for sharing that story of being taught by the students. Arusha, you had a question or a comment?
Sorry, my unmute button wasn't working. Um, yeah, I had a question. Katie kind of answered it. So, my question is, there's been times when I've had kind of spiritual experiences where something happens and I'm in awe or wonder, or just like, wow. And there's like a feeling of connectedness to something bigger in those moments. And it feels really joyful, I would say. That's maybe the feeling. But then it goes away, and I try to recapture it, but I can't recapture the feeling. I can just remember the memory of the feeling, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, how can one kind of hold on to those, or is it even possible? Am I just trying to do something that's not possible? So.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that you're touching in what I was trying to say about like that. Really, it's an experience, and when you have those experiences, it's not intellectual. It is really a feeling, and it's a feeling we want to hang on to. And it's puzzling later when we have doubts because we can look at our journal or we can look at notes and we can say, wow, I had this, I've talked to people about it, I can remember where I was sitting, I don't feel it now, and it's frustrating. And I think one way to look at that is imagine that if all of us, when we have that mountaintop experience, that really special experience, imagine we had it constantly all the time with no doubt, no question, no struggle. If that were the case, then we would not grow spiritually because we'd be constantly in a state of feeling like complete connection. So those periods where we're those dark nights of the soul, where we feel a little disconnected, we can't capture that feeling, are actually opportunities where we're growing spiritually. That's a paradox that when we feel furthest, Swedenborg says when we feel furthest from God, the angels are closest to us. But it doesn't feel that way. So just know that when you're having those moments where you can't recapture the same feeling, that it's a time of spiritual evolution and growth, whatever you're going through, and that the angels are closest to you during that time, even though it may not have that exact experience. So to keep our free will open, we have to have the tension, and that would be the tension that would come outside of that feeling, would be my guess. That was a great question. I hope hope what I said was helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Then I see Glenn, and then we'll go to Jason.
I don't have a question so much as an observation. For many years, I have felt that faith and doubt are only two sides of the same coin and cannot be separated. And there's no right side and wrong side. And it's just like any ordinary day I go through, I will be discouraged at times, and then I will feel more positive at other times. And that's a part of my experience of life as a human being. When I do have doubts, I like to formulate questions and I like to have conversations. Then I'm able to admit that these things still perplex me or trouble me, and I may be able to engage in conversation that will be helpful for myself and another individual. One of my favorite conversations is with a pastor of the UU pastor, and I forget the name, Universalist, and he has an incredible perspective, and I just love having conversation with this gentleman. But anyway, ask questions when I'm feeling troubled, and that I find that very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy to engage in a dialogue, talk to somebody else, particularly hopefully it's somebody who's not judgmental, not a pastor who says that your doubt is a sin, but find somebody who you can have a good conversation. Quick follow-up for you, Glenn, something that I've been puzzled about, and I wonder if you have it. I've met a number of pastors who have told me that they've completely lost their faith. They can't leave their jobs. They're dependent financially. So they're going through the motions, but they've lost their faith. Have you experienced that as well?
From time to time. Am I on? Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
from time to time. And my response is more of a listening mode and looking for how they continue to express their faith by simply going through the motions. And while they may think that that's um, a complete waste of time, and they're deeply troubled by perhaps their motivations or whatever, I like to engage in conversation and just do a lot of listening. And perhaps there will be an observation or two along the way that may be helpful. But yes, I've heard that from a few. One of the, I did not know this person myself, but about 30 years ago, United Methodist pastor from our area committed suicide and left a letter that spoke of that specifically. And it made me weary and very, very sad that he did not have that conversation with anyone who was close to him at that time. So, yeah, there's a
Yeah, I
lot at
think it's.
stake.
I guess also for a pastor, it is hard to say "I doubt" if you know without shame. So that could be more tricky in that particular case. I like what you also said that sometimes you may not be feeling it, but going through the rituals, the Sunday worship service is a great. Just go through it, even if you're not exactly sure you believe it. But it is a rubric that's been used for thousands of years that helps people. So thank you for that. Thanks for answering that question of mine. I'm going to ask, we'll just pass that along to Jason.
All right, thank you. So this thought theory, if you will, just sort of came to me, so I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to articulate it very well. So forgive me if I don't, I'm just going to give it a try. Theory being that one reason we may lose doubt or may experience doubt is our mind's eye, that we're picturing in our mind's eye what God looks like, what Jesus looks like, what different things look like, because that's what we do in our minds, right? And those aren't just things that we create ourselves, those are inheritances from hundreds of years of imagery, right? That has been challenged by science, that's been where we can say, oh no, that doesn't work with physics that we've learned. This doesn't work. But if we may be forgetting that those images are man-made, that they're just approximations of something that we cannot see, inherently cannot see, cannot visualize. I don't know, maybe it's just a theory that the visuals may be something that we get hung up on. I'd be curious your response to that.
Yeah, I think that was what I was trying to get to when I said when I die and they're going to say like you got it all, you got so much wrong. You saw a piece of it, and I think that in a literal culture where we go in like you're saying with a very clear picture of things, God is so much beyond anything we can comprehend. We can study it, we can use words, we can use mythologies, and for me the closest still is experience, having a spiritual experience. But I think you're right that we go in with those worldviews of what God is, and they can easily be disrupted or destroyed. One thing I was saying earlier, you can't inherit faith. I have met many adults who have inherited faith through the years, and then something horrible happens. Death of a child, death of a loved one, physical stuff, loss of a job, and they come devastated because they only inherited the faith, and in some ways they, would say like, I'm wearing the cross or I'm carrying the rosary, almost as like an amulet. That I don't necessarily believe it, but I went to church, I wear the cross, I say the prayers. God should protect me. It's like a protection racket against misfortune, and God failed, so therefore I don't believe. So that's another example of you're projecting into the situation what God is. When it doesn't live up to it, you can be devastated. So I think that's a good point. I'm going to go. I see Joy has her hand up, but I want to go with Katerina while I have the camera here, the microphone, and then we'll go to Joy.
I'll be quick. I actually love Jason's point, and it's not just projections of what God could be like, but projections of our relationship to Him, what we should be like. And I think what really struck me about the passage that we read is not the doubt, but the underlying theme of shame that came across and what the writer was saying. And if I were to coach that person in instances where it came up, I advise that people talk to themselves as they were a loving parent, especially if they have nobody that they can really be honest with in revealing that, but having an inner conversation where one party in that is a loving parent and understanding how they would approach you. And I think with that mindset, the idea of having a loving God, a loving Creator, would help resolve the shame that comes with the doubt.
Yeah, I really like that technique as well. And so theologically, we would know, often people say, how do you know if you're hearing a voice of an angel or from the dark side? And one of the things is angels never use shame. And they never use manipulation or condemnation. It's always the voice of a loving parent. So I think you've tapped into, that's the angelic voice. When we hear voices of shame, criticism, if that famous line that we all hear at some time, if everybody knew who you really were, no one would like you. Those are from the hells. And so I think that you've just offered a technique that would connect with the angelic. Joy?
Thank you, Rich. A couple quickies. One is when I was in seminary and studying with Reverend George Dole, and confessed that I had been outside church for a number of years. His comment was, well, nobody knows why they're in church if they haven't walked out at least once, which I thought was interesting. Saying basically, if you've got doubts, that's good. Meditate on them. And the other is I'm surrounded out here with people who reinforce that even when they hold a particular faith tradition, they are a unique embodiment of that relationship to the divine. And so how they find a path is different than anyone else's. And so your doubts will be something that others can walk with you and support you and say, you're not alone in this place. And keep moving.
Excellent advice. I like both of those. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on doubt? Yeah.
This conversation made me something that I read when I was in college. The sociologist Emil Durkheim, his book Elemental Forms of Religion, his theory was that the way a religion emerged was through something called collective effervescence, where, imagine like tribes sitting around a campfire beating the drums, and they're all sort of together and they feel something that's greater than themselves, and they're like, wow, they have this spiritual moment that is so uplifting that that is like they had faith in that moment. And out of that, and not get his whole theory because I probably don't even remember that well, was that religion came out of that. But I just wonder if in our world today we don't have enough of those moments that just sort of just carry us away when we don't in our modern world where we don't have that collective effervescence feeling that erases all doubt that we're part of something larger than ourselves.
Yeah, that reminded me of what Arusha's comment that I was, when she had shared that, I was thinking, gosh, there's a lot of people who don't even have that experience that she was describing. I would say that in some ways the modern secular world has squeezed out enchantment of our lives and told us that everything is what you can feel, touch, and experience, and anything beyond that. Well, enchantment, what you're describing, what I like to refer to as enchantment, but effervescence could be another way of saying it, that transcends the physical world and what can be understood simply through the physical touch, feel, five senses. And I do feel like we're in a slightly disenchanted period. And I think that's one reason there's such nihilism right now, particularly with our younger generation coming up. Like, what's the point? LOL. There's nothing to it. Because there really is, they've been told there's no enchantment to this experience. And I think that is one reason faith will probably make a resurgence, because it's one place that you're going to have experiences if you get on a faith path that you can't describe any other way. It's also a reason why so many younger people are having medicine journeys on psychedelics that are coming to me and saying that's the only place they've ever experienced anything beyond. So I think that's one reason we're seeing a rise in psychedelics among young people, is because it's a spiritual. It's their first ever chance to experience something outside of this realm, and it's quite exciting. So I think we'll see more of that as well. But I'm glad that we have this community. We have the effervescence of sharing ideas, having questions, and making questions the centerpiece of what we do. It's a way of practicing dialogue, really, in what we're doing here each week. And we're doing it in the faith community. So I appreciate all of you for participating in this discussion today, and with your thoughts, your prayers, your insights. And please send in your question for the next time I preach. I will use your question, and we'll always keep them anonymous. So with that, we will close out our discussion time.